This episode of Pick Up the Six podcast is brought to you by Everyman Jack. If you haven't heard of them, they're a men's grooming company that creates some of the highest performing, best smelling products on the market. They believe it's not just about what you put in your body that matters, but what you put on your body, from their body wash to deodorant to beard oil and more. They're made with naturally derived ingredients and incredibly outdoorsy scents that bring the best of nature to their bottles and bars. I'm a huge fan of all their stuff. The sandalwood scent, probably my favorite of all the things they have. And it's literally in my shower right now. So here's what you do. Head to everymanjack.com today and use our special promo code PUT6, PUT and the number 6 for 25% off on orders of $50 or more. Making small changes to your routine, even in the shower, can have a significant impact. And Everyman Jack makes that easy. Everyman Jack, naturally derived, outdoor inspired. We're also sponsored by Amino Vitals. Amino Vitals' mission is to provide the highest quality of amino acid-based nutritional products to all athletes aspiring to improve their conditioning and performance. The BCAAs, glutamine and arginine, help replenish the body's muscle proteins and jumpstart the recovery process. I've been using Amino Vital since last fall, got introduced to them, and I see a positive impact from their action and recovery products. It helps me just get rid of some of those, aches and pains that come with a tough workout. Hit up amino-vital.com, use the code PUT6 at checkout and save 20%, or just click on their link on the show page and save today. The headline in the Associated Press on July 7th read, "An Afghan man who spent years helping U.S. forces in Afghanistan is shot and killed in Washington." But there's so much more to that story, including a bond and brotherhood between the Afghan man killed, his name was Nasrat, and our guest today. Matt Butler is Army Special Forces. Nasrat was his interpreter on deployments to Afghanistan. We cover a lot in our conversation, including their service together, the movie script that was Nasrat and his family's exit from Afghanistan, and we get into plant-based medicine for PTSD, all on this episode of Pick Up the Six podcast. Hey guys, Brian Jodis back with another episode of Pick Up the Six podcast. Matt Butler joins me, former U.S. Army Special Forces. Great dude, got connected to him from our buddy Worth. You might remember when we were talking Afghan evac. He was on the show, and I said, I got somebody that would be an interesting conversation for you to have. So, Matt, grateful to have you, man. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Bro, real quick before we get into it, super grateful for our sponsors on the front of the show. You see this? Look at this loot I got back here. Look at this stash. So I talked about it on last week's show. The guys at One Nation Coffee have absolutely hooked it up. John Richards is the founder and the owner. It's a veteran-owned business. He is a former Navy EOD guy, right? So you were Special Forces in the Army, but the guys that sort of running around with the SEALs, blowing stuff up with them, that's what John did for a long time. So he's a great dude. And he started getting in the coffee space late in his military career and was like, I want to keep doing this. So they made this company, One Nation Coffee. Their coffee's great. I've been drinking it this week. It's excellent. So I'm not going to tell you about something that's dog crap. It's good. He hooked it up. And here's what we're doing. We're sending coffee to our guests. So Matt, when we get done, hook me up with your address. I'm going to send some coffee your way.
Yeah. I love it.
Right. And all of it is, it's Reveille, right? It's all got cool military names. They got a special 912 blend for those who, sprung into action that next day. Yeah. We got grounds, we got beans. I got pods back there. It's awesome. And for those of you listening, they're like, well, shoot, man, Brian, you're hooking your guests up with coffee. Well, here's what you do. Go to onenationcoffee.com, use the code PUT6 at checkout, and John's hooking you with 15% off, just like that. No questions asked. And they've got a foundation where they're giving a bunch of money back to veteran charities and stuff too. So just love it. It fits with what we're doing here. Their catchphrase, "We've got your 6 a.m." kind of fits with our style around here.
Yeah, that's kind of funny.
Yeah, it works out well. And that was already in place before I ever even met John. Somebody was like, "Oh, that's cool, man. Did you help him come up with his?" I'm like, "No, man, that's the way the good Lord intervenes in our lives." And so here we are.
That's right.
Dude, you're in Utah, man. You told me it was hot out there. What's going on in Utah today?
Whew, just trying to survive this heat wave. We got about we had a record snowfall up in the mountains. I think it was
Right.
something crazy like 900 inches over the winter. But so it's helping. I mean, we have water, moisture, but it's just really, really hot.
Well, I'm in central North Carolina, about an hour from where you spent a little bit of time at Fort Bragg.
Yep.
And it's hot as balls here this week. I mean, that's just
Yeah.
it's about the way to describe it. It's not like it's just hot, just on you. It's super humid. 3 mile run today, soaked.
Oof.
It's not like it was not like a long, strenuous run, absolutely drenched. But that's the way it goes, man. I mean, it's middle of July.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
anyways, well, look, man, I'm thrilled to have you. We're going to share a pretty heavy story here in a minute about a friend of yours, your interpreter, when you spent your time in Afghanistan.
Yes, sir.
Being a little lighthearted on the front here, but we are going to share a heavy story because you guys remember back to when we were kind of in the throes of the withdrawal and the exit. And we got tied in with the Team America folks and with Worth, and we were talking a lot about just what that was looking like. And I just he came to my heart about a week or two ago. I was watching Sound of Freedom and prepping for the interview with Jordan Harmon from Angel Studios about, that child trafficking, just that terrible plague on our world. I just was kind of thinking back to Worth for some reason. And I said, boy, is there anything going on in the spaces? My friend Matt would be one to talk to. He's got a pretty emotional story about that. But before that, Army guy, man, special forces, right? Got to travel the globe. What led you in that path? Was that a thing as a kid? You were like, I'm going to do that, or was this?
No,
I've heard multiple versions of how guys get there. I always just like the journey. So what was it?
I don't even have a word to describe it. I mean, it was circumstance, really.
Hmm.
So I joined the Army in 90. I was an enlisted kid right out of, right off the block, so to speak. Needed money to go to college. I grew up pretty poor, wanted out of my small town of 500. So I did an original enlistment to, an enlisted guy in the Signal Corps. I got out, used the money to go to school. I was in ROTC here in Utah in Weber State, and thought, I'm going to just boost my GPA by taking some of those ROTC classes. I had no intention of making it a career, but I mean, I can march in a circle, so let's get some A's. And then at the end of my college, experience, I was like, actually, the only thing that interests me is the Army. So I went back into the Army. But
what year was it? So you went in at 90, but then got out to go back to school.
Yep.
Right? And then went back in. So when do you go back in?
So I was actually in the reserves. So I joined in 90 and transitioned as a cadet and as ROTC student within a couple years. And then I graduated in 93 as a field artillery officer. But I also had, my first wife, she wasn't very, she was worried. I guess that's the way to say it. She was pretty anxious about me, in any war and combat, even though that was 90 and, there wasn't anything on the horizon necessarily. So I sort of tried to, keep the peace by going into the Guard. So I was a field artillery, National Guard guy, and I was actually selling real estate for a couple of years. And I was miserable. I was just so miserable. I mean,
yeah,
no offense to realtors out there, but my experience is that, they would stab you in the back for $5, man. And it just, the ethos that I had already experienced and the ethos I wanted to experience in the military, I wasn't finding it. And so I literally just had to tell her, like, listen, I have to go on active duty. Now that was in, in the mid 90s in the Clinton era. So the military was shrinking, not increasing. And so I went to a mentor of mine and said, how do I get on active duty in this shrinking military? And he said, oh, there's 4 ways right now as an officer. You can either be a doctor, a lawyer, a chaplain, or a Green Beret. And I was like, well, I don't know what a Green Beret is, but
so you start thinking about those things, like doctor, no.
Yeah.
Lawyer, no. Chaplain, that's not going to work, right? So like, all right, cool. I'll just do this other extremely hard thing.
Yeah, like what tell me more about what that is, and I'll do
Right.
that, I guess.
Right.
So I actually joined 19th Group, a National Guard unit here in Utah, and I and my mentor, he coached me really well. He's like, listen, you need to go through, you need to transfer to the Guard, you need to go through selection, you need to go through the Q course. Yeah. And then when you've completed all your training, there's a process you'll go through to become active duty, but don't let anybody in the unit know that, because if you do, they're going to, they're spending their money, their training dollars to get you through that course. Yeah. So it's betrayal. And so don't tell them. So that's exactly what I did. I joined the
inside baseball knowledge.
Yeah. So I joined the unit. Within a couple months, I went to selection. Within a few more months after that, I was in the Q course. A year and a half to almost 2 years later, after all the selection and the training, filled out the forms and went active duty. And I was on and then I still had a little bit of training to do because I came from the Guard. So I had to go through what they call the advanced course for captains. Mm-hmm. And while I was going to go to the infantry one down at what is now called Fort Moore in Benning, or used to be Benning in Georgia. So I thought, well, I'm going down there for advanced course. I might as well hit up Ranger School while I'm at it. So after all was said and done, I started that process in 97, completed the Q course, SEER school, language school, Ranger School, and the advanced course, and was back on a team by 99. So about a little over 2 years, a little less than 2.5 years.
Were you guys selecting languages at the time, or did you get picked for something?
So they picked your language based on your ability, and then that kind of determined your group. And I barely speak English as a first language, so
you seem to have a pretty good grip of it so far.
Yeah, well, I do struggle learning languages, and so that was probably the one part of selection I was the most concerned with, because if you don't show any language aptitude, and I did struggle on the aptitude test, mm-hmm. So I was assigned French, and that meant from the active duty groups there could have been 3. I could have gone to first group, because first group is out in Asia. And there was some French colonialism there. So, there's a little bit of applicability. Same with French colonialism in Africa, and then 10th group, which is Europe. And at the time, third group was kind of considered, to use a cliche, it was kind of the redheaded stepchild of the groups. At the time, I'm kind of going into some military lingo here, but there's what they call COCOMs, which is the major combatant commands, and the whole world was divided into COCOMs, and there are 4 of the 5 active duty groups, excluding third, was assigned to that, to all those different COCOMs. Africa wasn't even a COCOM. Like, we didn't even consider Africa as a combatant command. Yeah. And for emergencies, Africa was divided between 5th group and 10th group. So third group was going to Africa and doing all the, the heavy work, doing all the rotating missions. But if something ever went down, third group would have had to just step aside and either let 5th or 10th handle it. So third group was kind of like nobody wanted to go there. So it's interesting to see what played out after 9/11, where between third group and 7th, like after 5th did the invasion, they left, and 3rd and 7th, took over those primary rotations. And over the course of 20 years, really, you could make an argument based on, medals, Medal of Honors, wounded in action, killed in action, time spent on the ground, however you want to quantify it, that really third group became like one of the preeminent groups. Like it really rose to.
Well, even the stuff you guys were involved with and the things you were tasked with doing.
Yeah.
Right. During multiple iterations of.
Well, 20 years worth. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. That's sort of the point. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because 5th and 10th group they were there for the initial invasion. Then they left to go to Iraq and left us with Afghanistan. And
so you had Afghanistan the whole time.
Right. And that's where the really, what we call the pipe hitting was really taking place, was in Afghanistan.
Trying to remember, we got longtime friend of the show, Lowell Coppert, Green Beret. I think he was third group. And I think I remember him talking about learning French. He told me the story about when he was in selection being so delirious. He was talking to his buddy, but I think if I remember the story right, he thought he was talking to a dog or something. I mean, because he was just so sleep deprived. He was first and third group. He was both of those two.
Yeah.
In his time. You guys probably had some overlap. You're a little bit older than he is age wise, but in those early Afghanistan days, I mean, he was there for a lot of different things, 2005 ish too. So you guys might have, I don't know, probably had some overlap in that space. So that was, you were in active training up, doing stuff pre 9/11, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was on a team by
99.
99. Yeah.
Okay.
No, let me think. 2000, early 2000. Yeah.
Okay.
Early 2000. I was on a team.
Early 2000, October 2000, Cole,
Yeah.
September 2001, 9/11, world change.
I was the senior team leader in the battalion when 9/11 happened. So
where were you on that day? And what was, I mean, I know what your reaction will be, but just where were you? What was that day?
I was getting ready. I had like I don't remember the exact time that happened. Probably it was like 8 something in the morning, I believe, because I had a 9 a.m. brief with my battalion commander to briefing on a training concept that we were putting together.
And all that got put on hold.
Yeah, I walked over to his office and I was sitting outside of his office. And, just about every military office has Fox News on. And so, that happened. And he was just like, yeah, this brief's not happening. Go back to your team and wait for orders and wait for instructions.
Yeah.
And then, everything was off the table at that point. So,
how quickly from that Tuesday, are you in country anywhere, geared up, shipped out, going? Was it a little while? What was
it was a while.
Was it
yeah,
a while?
well, I guess we're going to get into it. So I'll tell you.
Please. Yep.
So here I was, the senior team leader in 1st Battalion, 3rd Group, and we went and did a train up in Virginia to get ready to go to Afghanistan. And my battalion executive officer called me in, and I mean, we're like just leaning forward. We're like, this is, like October, or probably November, December 2001. There were already troops on the ground, but we were getting ready to go over and augment those. And he called me into his mobile office up there and was like, "Hey, I'm going to remove you from the team." And I was like, I couldn't even process the words. Like some team leaders were getting 2 to 3 years on a team. I'd been there about a year and a half. And I was like, what are you talking about? He said, yeah, my logistics officer is just letting me down. I need somebody I can count on. So I'm going to make you the battalion logistics officer. And I said, sir, I know zero about, I can't even spell logistics. I have no clue what you're like to put an inexperienced non-logistician in a key role like that, getting ready to go to war. Like, it didn't make any sense to me. And so he said, look at your left shoulder, which of course is where the special forces tab was. He's like, you'll figure it out. And, I was like, I was extremely, to say that I was extremely upset would be an understatement. And I don't want to condone this behavior. I don't really think that this is a highlight of my life, but it is what happened. And that was, I basically said, F you, not to his face, but in the back of my head. And there's another unit up in Virginia that's classified. It's on the level of, Delta and SEAL Team 6, one of our government's non-attributable units. And so I picked up the phone and called and said, I'd like to go to your selection. And so next thing I know, I was at selection for that.
Whoa.
And
so you did hard pivot.
Oh yeah. I'm like, you're gonna take me out of the fight, like when the biggest fight.
Yeah, you weren't having it.
Yeah, like,
and he probably, he probably had good reason, right? Like, he needed somebody he could trust or whatever in that role. But it seems like you were just like, no, my calling, I'm going in this thing. I'm going to do this. I'm going to fight. I'm not going to manage the fight. I'm going to fight.
Yeah. Do you want your most experienced, team leader leading a team, or
Yeah.
running logistics. Like it didn't,
Yeah.
like to me, it just didn't compute.
Matt, how
So
often do you ever think back on that? Like just the way that
oh,
those,
I do. I think about it all the time.
right.
I can war game it either way. Like part of me thinks I made the wrong decision because when they got into country, there were some team leaders that were relieved and they took those guys that had been pulled up to staff and pushed them back down to teams. So
Yeah.
it may have played out that way. I mean, the guy that replaced me wasn't relieved, so I wouldn't have gone back to my team. I mean, he was only on the team a couple months before he was in combat with them. And again, I mean, if that's what you must do, great. But why put the least experienced guy in the battalion on a team and replace the most experienced guy? So yeah, long story short, I ended up going up to Virginia, going through selection, going through the training course, which is, put me on another whole nother pipeline. And then so how I finally got into my first combat was in Iraq in 03, 04. I augmented the Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force Iraq. And so, yeah, I wound up for Iraq OIF 1 in 03 and 04, almost a year. I think it was about 9 months I was over there. So that was my first of 6 deployments and the only one to Iraq. The next 5 would all be Afghanistan.
You spent the bulk of your time there. I referenced that sort of heavy part of the conversation. We're going to talk about a man that you got to meet, spend quite a bit of time on, 2 deployments, met him in 2009. Nasrat Ahmad Yar, right? Call him Naz, right? For
Nas,
the purpose, Naz, for the purpose of our conversation. And the reason we're connecting the dots is he was your interpreter, right? And becomes a critically important part of this warfare that we're a part of, right? If you're going to be embedded in country like this, doing the work that we're doing, they were a critically important role. Do you mind just, we've not done a lot of context around our war fighters and then the relationship with the interpreter. I'm really looking forward to this new movie that it's either coming out or it's come out or it's coming out.
The Guy Ritchie one, The Covenant.
Yeah. The Covenant.
Okay. Well, like, let's talk about that. Just, I mean, like,
sure.
I guess this is a little bit just, egocentric on me, but like I was telling my wife the other day, it's like, it's pretty damn bizarre that there's 2 movies in the theaters right now that both really, really touch my life.
Yeah.
Covenant, because of the soldier interpreter relationship. And then, like you mentioned at the beginning with, The Sounds of Freedom, because we'll talk about that's how I exfilled Nasrat eventually out of country, was with that organization's aircraft. And I was just like,
with the Nazarene Project.
Yeah.
Wow. Dude.
So I mean,
I got chills, and like we've not, you and I haven't orchestrated any of this. Like that's just life. That's just,
when you said that, I was just like, we're gonna have to, I don't know what the odds. I'm not a statistician, but like, what are the odds of like 2 movies in the theaters on the same week, both being like pretty pivotal in your life? I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, and like God's amazing. It's my belief, right? And just, I hadn't talked to Worth in a while. I just was like, I need to check in on that. Yeah. I need to check in on him and just what's going on over there.
Well, I freaking love Worth. He's a great man. He's a great human being, and he's been very helpful for me for years, ever since we served together. But
so these guys, I mean, well, tell me what they do. We've not done this on this show, right? Tell me what they do for you guys. And then I also want to hear about how you form that relationship. And do you have to be careful in forming that relationship too?
Yeah. I mean, like any relationship that you build with anybody is a process of, layering and building layers of trust and all the different dynamics to a relationship, trust and respect and, communication and all the different things that, but imagine, that you can say that for your neighbor, you can say that for, a cousin or whatever, somebody in your life. But imagine like those same parameters and the intensity that they rise to in a combat scenario, right? Like now I have to trust this person with my life. What is that like? That's a different level of intensity. Same
Yeah.
with the communication and reliability, trustworthiness, all the different things. So it's a very important relationship. It's a very life or death relationship. It's an intense relationship at times. So yeah, like it's
How much time are you spending together?
every minute of every day. I
And
mean, except for sleeping.
is one interpreter helping a unit? I mean, I don't know
It
this,
kind of
right?
depends. Yeah, it kind of depends on the type of unit and the size of the unit. But in my role, so I met Nasrat on my um my third deployment, and then he was my interpreter for number 3 and number 4. And so yeah, in that role that we were in, he was my primary interpreter for not everybody in the unit had one, but there were 2 primary interpreters, basically one for me and one for my first sergeant.
Mhm.
And we used them for everything. And you really come to rely on them for way more than interpretation. It could
Institutional
be like,
knowledge, like just
yeah,
cultural stuff.
cultural stuff, religious information, situational awareness, interpretation, running errands, running the crews. Like sometimes you have Afghan crews that don't speak any English, so they become sort of like foremen, like on sort of construction type projects. And then also just like sometimes resourcing stuff, like you might need something from the market, like occasionally we would host dignitaries and we'd want
Mm,
to would want to cook goat for them and stay traditional. So they'd have to resource certain things on what we call on the economy, on the local economy.
yeah.
So they really become like really, I mean, integral is probably not even close to the intensity of the word that I need to describe it, but they're totally ingrained, totally integral to the whole entire process. So
Outside of being in a combat zone,
yeah.
how much more than that are they putting their life on the line?
Oh, yeah, like even if it wasn't, I mean, even if it wasn't like combat operations and patrolling and things like that, you have to remember that like the Taliban, it's an insurgency, right? So it wasn't like they were wearing uniforms and they were across
Yeah,
the line of
right.
demarcation, and they were whatever a mile away in that village and we had a front between us. It was not like that at all. Like the Taliban were in these villages, the same villages that a lot of these interpreters came from, or their families lived. And so by volunteering and by taking on that role, they really put their lives and their families' welfare at risk, pretty intensely. In
Yeah.
fact, I like to really kind of think that Nas didn't know better. I mean, and I don't want that to come off like an insult that it kind of sounds like. But can I tell you how he
Yeah,
came
please.
out? Because
Yeah.
this is really important.
Yeah. Where'd he come from? Give me a story.
Yeah, like when he passed a couple weeks ago, he was 31 years old. So if you do the math,
He was
he
super
was
young.
roughly 8 or 9 when 9/11 happened.
Wow.
So when one of the major air bases in Afghanistan, which became a foothold for us to get in, once we established a foothold, we could push personnel and logistics and everything there. The air base was called Bagram, and it was
Bagram.
just
Yep.
outside of Bagram village, which is where and there's another little village outside of that called Jean Kadam, and that was the village that he had grown up in. So essentially, when I met him in '09, January of '09, literally the way that he was introduced from the outgoing officer to me, the incoming officer, was, yeah, this is Nasrat. And I'm looking at him like this dude's like a pimple faced
Yeah,
teenager.
he was
What the
17 or
Yeah,
18 years old.
exactly. Yeah. And I was like, because a lot of the interpreters, they had fled the country or immigrated, gone to any number of places in Europe, gone to school, learned English for educational purposes, etc. Had education behind their English. And then there's Nasrat.
Yeah.
And you're like, at first you're like, why are you handing off this, like, this unqualified interpreter and all these questions and red flags going off? This kid, he's a kid and all these things. And so the way that they introduced him basically was like, oh yeah, like he showed up, or when he was about 8 or 9 years old and wouldn't go away. And like that's always stuck with me. Like nobody
Yeah.
reminded me of that when he was killed. Like I've always remembered for the past, however many years it's been now, 14, 15 years, I've always remembered the fact that, yeah, like my introduction was, here's the kid that wouldn't leave. Here's the kid that wouldn't go away. And essentially, they were paying him out of their own pocket sometimes, paying him out of operational funds to do things like, clean toilets, empty the trash, rake leaves, whatever, just something to keep him busy. Because essentially he just like, we just adopted him for lack of better words.
Yeah. How long were you guys together? How long? Right.
A year total. So both of those employments were 6 months back to back. So 6 months from January to June of 2009, and then repeated that in 10. So I spent a year with him as my primary interpreter. I was really pleased to see him when I got back in 10.
And then you guys kind of go your separate ways.
Yeah.
I mean, he starts a family up, right? Like,
right.
He grows up, A
number of years pass. I mean, I did another couple deployments, 5 and 6. And just kind of lost touch. I mean, the internet and social media wasn't quite as prevalent, and so you just kind of, I mean, I knew, like, if I came through Bagram, I'd generally go to the special forces bases and you'd see Nas, or you'd talk to another interpreter and you'd hear. And so, I mean, I was still
kind
aware
check in on him a little bit and see.
Yeah. But by the time I did my last deployment from 13 to 14, and then, by 17, I'm getting out of the Army, I hadn't heard from him in several years. No fault of anybody, just that's life and busy and communication systems.
So then as everything starts to, I guess, unravels, the first word that came to mind.
No, there's another chapter.
Yeah. Okay. All right. What else then?
So he, and I'm going to admit this just because I appreciate transparency and everything. So I'll be transparent. He reached out to me in 20 and said, "Hey bro, will you help me and my wife and kids immigrate to the US?" And regretfully, my initial response was no. I was in a pretty dark place, and I knew that wasn't going to be, a 2-day project and then wash my hands of it and be done. And I think for a lot of veterans, we have the optimism and the hope that we can take the war and compartmentalize it and then move on with our lives and never think of it again. And frankly, when he was murdered, that night, as I was kind of, well, not kind of, but I'll admit it, as I was crying over it, I told my wife, I said, this war is going to be with me for the next, 30, 40 years. I do not get to let it go. I do not get to compartmentalize it. And that was my fear in 20. I was like, nope, sorry, I can't help you, because I didn't know that I had the capacity to help. And then it was probably maybe a day or two later where I was like, what kind of shitbag are you, man? Like really, dude? Like all this guy's done for you and all the things, and just, and all he's done for this country and special forces and everything, and you can't help him. So I reached back out to him and said, okay, I'm on board. Let's get this done. So he started his immigration process. You need something called a SIV, a special immigration visa. And so we started that in early 20, and, we got the paperwork done, and that was a big ordeal. We finally got it all turned in. And then, like, literally, like, every week he'd, text me, hey, what's the status? What's going on? What have you heard? What's the news? When do I get to come? And you're like, hey, welcome to the United States government and bureaucracy at its finest. Like, I have no updates. Like, it went into the giant bureaucracy machine. When it pops out the other side, I have no idea, no control over. It's not like your country where you can pay a bribe and, speed things up.
For
Like,
some people, it might be, but for those of
yeah,
us playing by the rules,
well,
unfortunately,
yeah,
it's
and without
not.
the
Okay.
means and different things,
Right.
right? Like it was like, yeah, sorry, no, I was like, I got nothing for you, and so that went on literally up until 2021.
Yeah.
So yeah, and again, this idea that you don't get to compartmentalize the war. So you wake up, and what was it, July, August of
Yeah.
21,
Yeah. Yep. End of
and
July.
you're just
Yep.
like, oh, oh hell, here we go again. Gonna drag all this up, and then of course he's at that point, like quite literally, there were probably in the neighborhood of 100 to 200 like text messages a day.
Sure.
Like I was reaching out through the veteran network, trying to
Just trying
connect
to
with
work the network as you could. Yeah.
resources, yeah, and
Mhm.
whoever, anybody who knew anything, like, please put me in touch with. So I was doing all those text messages, and then I was reaching back the other direction to Nas saying, okay, we think, like right now it seems like the best answer is to go to Kabul and wait near the airport. And
God,
then when that
jeez,
would,
man.
fall apart, okay, well, now where are we going to go? And then, he would, okay. And then he had messaged me. I got a message. I was told to go to, go back to Bagram. And so you just like, there were several, I don't know, several weeks, months there where we were just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, text messaging, in both directions, trying to navigate him and keep him safe, keep him out of harm's way, and his family. I mean, he spent every dollar he had, because he'd go into these communities where he wasn't known. He didn't know who the Taliban was or wasn't, who was safe, wasn't. They saw him the same. Like, is this guy
Right.
Taliban?
Right.
Whatnot. And the only way to kind of like guarantee any sort of degree of safety was to pay, again, to bribe, to bribe local people
So
for
he's
safe.
just spending what he's got to make his way
Yeah.
through all that. I want to hear about his actual exit. And
Yeah.
you've mentioned it a few times. We're going to get to the super heavy part of it, which is how he ultimately loses his life. We'll get there. We're going to get there, guys. We're getting
Yeah.
there. Before that, before we talk about his actual exit, because we've heard different stories, and I just want to kind of on behalf of our listeners and just the fact that you mentioned you're in a dark place. You guys put so much on the line for so long. I don't think it, by the average American, it's probably not understood what that July and August of 21 was like for you guys. And so I'm just telling you, bro, like, we're just grateful for what you guys had to go through during that reliving of like everything you went through for 20 years to see the way that went down. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that it had to play out that way. And I know a lot of people are, and I know you don't need me to tell you that I'm sorry, but just like, I just don't think it can be underestimated. And this is an audience that listens about picking up the six and just being grateful for that. It's like, what a shit show and what a shitty thing for so many warriors to have to deal with. Um,
Well, yeah,
I don't know,
we can open that
that's
can
just
of
my
worms.
that's just my off the cuff, just kind of thoughts about it.
Yeah, well, we've opened the can of worms. So if I may, I'd like to comment on that on two levels. First of all, I consider myself very apolitical now, because in the other part that we're going to talk about in the second half of the call, I've had to be pretty involved with politics, and the more I'm involved with it,
Mm,
the less of a fan I am.
sure.
So I consider myself pretty apolitical, but and so this isn't really from an apolitical place. This isn't a heavy criticism of the Biden administration, although it could be, but I don't want it to come off that way. But here's the deal, man. Point number one is a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and treasure went into that effort. And to leave the way we did, I mean,
Yeah.
it's unfathomable. It's unconscionable. I don't even have words to describe what an insult to the veteran community it was to do that the way you did. The way the administration, not you, but the administration did, like that was horrific. And yeah, that opens up all the wounds. And then the second comment is, like, frankly, and this is Butler's opinion. I don't know how many of my vet friends feel the same way as I do, but we as a sovereign nation, we owed a response to 9/11. You can't let foreign
Yep.
entities, whether they're, governments or quasi governments or whatever, come onto US soil and kill 5,000, people, or I can't remember the number, 2,000 people, right? And not owe them a response. But my problem with it is that especially Iraq was a goose chase. There was probably no reason to go in there other than to vindicate Dick Cheney and Bush Sr. And then second of all, which we didn't really do. And then second of all, Afghanistan for 20 years, my personal opinion that 18 and a half of those 20 years was driven by the industrial military complex war machine.
Yep.
Turning millionaires into billionaires.
Yep.
At the expense of the blood of my brothers and sisters.
But I think that's why we here, and other, we're not the only ones doing it, are attempting to, in the aftermath of that, not lose sight of the hundreds and thousands of you guys that went and put it on the line. It's not for nothing. I mean, that is not for nothing. But the way it ended was shitty.
Yeah. So you took an already, waste of a war and waste of life and waste of time and everything like that, and you punctuated it with a godforsaken withdrawal that just created so much horror. So yeah, so that's how Nas, sitting there waiting for he and his family waiting for their visas, and then it turned into life-saving navigation, safe house to safe house. At one point, I literally got him to, and I don't say me, let me be very clear. This was a team, a big team of people. I couldn't even mention all of them. But yeah, so we had him on the northern border, just outside of Mazar-e Sharif. And I was literally talking to him about how to get inner tubes out of tires, build a raft, float across the river. I had talked to a few veteran friends about going into, Tajikistan. I mean, all sorts of just crazy stuff. We were throwing everything we could at the wall and seeing what stuck. But no, I mean, the river was pretty raging, and he had a wife and young kids. So eventually, he went back down. He was in Mazar-e Sharif, and then I was posting about it on Facebook, and my cousin, she was friends with the CEO of Operation Underground Railroad, which joined forces with Glenn Beck.
Yep.
And became the Nazarene Fund.
Yep.
And she says, listen, I'm going to, can I connect you? And so instead of just talking to a faceless, nameless person, I was connected to some of the higher leadership in that organization directly. And they were so accommodating, so helpful. And they had a plane in country when the Taliban said, yeah, this is it. No more planes coming in. What's here is here. We'll let you fill your planes, and then they can go, and then that's it. And we just prayed. There was Nas praying, me praying, everybody praying that he could get a seat on that plane. And I got a phone call from that gentleman that I've been working with, and he said, "I'm gonna put your 5 on this plane." Or yeah, 5. Because their last child was born in the refugee camp in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. So anyway, yeah, so they got the last 5 seats and then went to a refugee camp. And then it was the same process. Bro, what's going on? What's the update? What am I coming? How long am I here? I'm like, again, out of my hands, Nas, out of my hands. You're safe. You're fed. You have a tent. It's not great, but the Taliban's not there. So let's just focus on good stuff, right? Let's just focus on, you're not running from the Taliban. And so he waited it out about 9 months, and then his youngest child was born, and then he got relocated to Philadelphia, and he was in Philadelphia from 20 let's see, Yeah, 22 to early this year, 23.
Yep.
So about a year in Philadelphia, and ironically, didn't feel safe. And that was the last time I saw him. I went out to Philly and visited him and his family. And yeah, he didn't feel safe. So he said there was a much stronger Afghan community, and so he would actually go down there every weekend anyway. It's 4 hours, so
Yep.
they were spending every weekend in Philadelphia or in DC. So as soon as he could put it together, he left Philly and went to DC. He was living in Alexandria, and he was driving a tow truck for another Afghan during the day, and then Lyft at night, because frankly, that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to bust his ass and put away the money. His dream was owning his own tow company, and he was well on the way to doing that. He was a hard worker, intelligent, bright, um, patriotic, always cheerful soul. And so he was out there making it happen. And then, yeah, he was murdered late in the evening, late at night on July 2nd. And I got the phone call on the morning of July 3rd from
We're just a few
DC
weeks.
homicide.
We're just a few weeks removed. And you guys, maybe you saw it on the news or you heard about it, or maybe this is the first time you're hearing about it. He was that kid that was always there, right? And just kind of always working. He was looking to carry that over.
Yep.
And I wish we could tell you that this has a happier ending to his individual story, but it doesn't. And that's the heavy. This has all been heavy, but that's the super heavy part of this.
Yeah.
While he's busting his ass, a tragic event like that happens.
And I mean, the thing is if you've seen the footage, if you've watched any of the news reports, some of them include the footage. Somebody caught it on their doorbell camera. It's 4 kids. I mean, they're young, like maybe 14 to maybe 16 at the most. And it senseless, wrong place, wrong time. That's all it was. I mean,
God,
I have no idea.
it's so wild, man.
Yeah.
It's so wild that he goes through all of that. Like Tally could have got him anytime.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Here's a kid that like put his life on the line, put his life at risk, put his family's lives at risk from the time he was about 8 or 9 years old until he could finally get out of that country, 20 years later. And then, also lived in dangerous circumstances in Philly,
Yeah.
and then, doing one of the most dangerous jobs. And yeah, no rhyme or reason to it whatsoever. Just horrific tragedy.
You guys have probably sprung into action, I'm sure, to help and support his family. So now my first thought is like, there's got to be ways, GoFundMe, something where our listeners can do something to support them, help them. Wife, three kids,
4 kids,
4 kids.
Yeah, daughter, and then 3 sons.
Send me whatever is out there to support them. We'll put it in the show notes. We'll put it on the show page. We'll pick up the six. We'll throw some support that way for sure. Because they've got his family's got to kind of rebuild their life without him now.
Yeah. And that was the beautiful thing. As soon as everybody heard that, those old group text messages that had been so critical in 21 in getting him safe, sprung right back into action.
Yeah.
And it was just beautiful. I mean, all these people who maybe didn't meet him, didn't serve with him, but had been part of his rescue, been part of his evacuation, his immigration, and in fact, I knew, I'd been in contact with his caseworkers in Philly. I contacted them. They sent a contingency down to attend the funeral. I mean, everybody just sprung into action. And yeah, there's a GoFundMe out there. We're pushing for a pretty sizable amount. We're over 500,000 right now.
Wow.
We're not trying to just, get the funds to bury him or the funds to cover the next couple car payments. we
Try and
want
take care
to,
of his family here for a while.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're trying to set it up in a trust so that they're taken care of for long term.
How do you, I'm going to ask you just a blunt question. I, I hope that's okay.
Yeah.
How do you add this to everything else you've had to process through this? Because we're going to talk sort of with the time we've got left, the ways in which you're looking to take care of yourself, but also take care of others. That's a lot. That's a lot, man.
I you know, I've gone through quite a transformation in the past couple of years, in an effort to cure my PTSD or to live beyond it. And part of that's been a spiritual awakening. And I don't believe in coincidence anymore. I just don't. I
Yeah.
believe that everything happens for a reason.
Yep.
Even the tragedies happen for a reason.
Yep.
And, when I must have done somewhere in the neighborhood of a dozen, 15 different interviews that week. And anybody would ask me, do you have anything else to say before we end? And I would always say, yeah, I really hope that these young men turn their lives around and live in a way that memorializes Nasrat and live a life that he would have lived. Because that's really the only justice that'll be carried out. I mean, the detective that talked to me said, hey, they're young teenagers. Even if they were 18, it doesn't matter. In DC, they have what they call juvenile life, which means you go to jail until you're 21. So, I mean, even if that wasn't the case, even if they went to jail for 60 years,
Right.
it doesn't bring him back.
Right.
So
Yeah.
how do we turn something like this into a positive? And in my mind, the only way to do it is for those four men to turn their lives around and to live quadruple the life that Nas would have lived, and be an example of change.
What are you tactically doing that's led to that sort of spiritual kind of awakening? Right. What are you doing in your life?
We're gonna go there.
I mean, it's up to you as much as you want to.
No, I want to. I just,
Yeah.
if this is the timing.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to caveat this and say two things. I want to be very, very clear, if I may. Okay.
Please.
First of all, as we discussed, I'm an officer. Officers don't generally get into the scrapes that the NCOs do. So first of all, I want to give respect and deference to them. I also want to be very clear that I was not out there, doing the pipe hitting, as it were. I mean, I was shot at and rocketed and mortared and all those things. Yeah, but not nearly to the degree that the NCOs were. And I'm not pretending that they were, first of all. Second of all, I think that it's, in my new role, PTSD is a topic that I've had to deep dive into. And the thing about PTSD, or any trauma for that matter, is, it's not a contest. It's not a contest to see whose is worse or whose is better or anything like that. If anybody out there is traumatized or suffering from trauma or PTSD, then that's very individual and personalized to them. So when I say that I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, it's not necessarily all because of the war. There were a lot of things in my personal life that were going on that contributed to it as well. But that was also secondary and third order effects of of war and military and everything like that. So I just want to caveat and say, nope, I wasn't quite in the mix like everybody, like some of the others. And please don't judge me or anybody else or yourself over your PTSD. What you have is yours, and it's very personal in nature. And that is actually the nature of it. And so we have to get out of this place of like comparing ourselves, because that is actually more harmful. Because then people are saying, well, I didn't do this, I shouldn't be that bad. I'm not as, that guy seems to have his shit together and I don't, and I didn't experience so much, so I guess I don't need help. And then we're just, we're further perpetuating unhealthy lifestyles and choices and putting people at risk. Okay. So with that, what I'll say is, to answer your question, is so when I retired in 2017, I moved back to Utah. I was in the midst of my third divorce.
Mm.
Um, I describe it as an iceberg. On the tip of the iceberg, everything great, right? Like I had a military retirement, I had a six-figure job, I had a sports car and a big house, and yeah, I would have told everybody everything was fine. Everything's fine. Plus, it's beat into your head as a Green Beret, like you don't show weakness. Like
Yeah.
that is that's like sharks and blood in the water, dude. Like at least in those days, right? Like if you showed weakness, like the sharks would start to circle, and you better be careful. So like it was kind of ingrained in me from the community and everything else, like to not really admit that I even had a problem. Um, and then what happened was, like I said, so on the surface, everything looked good. But in reality, under the surface, what was going on was I was going through my third divorce. I was using alcohol combined with opioids to get sleep at night because I couldn't sleep, right? And that's exactly what they say don't do. Like big bold letters on the label, like do not take with alcohol. And I'd wash it down with alcohol. Um, Really, really depressed. There was no joy in life. Deeply suicidal, and yeah, that was. Oh, and then the other thing was the law. um, I was getting called. I was getting calls out to the house pretty frequently with the law enforcement, and they were getting closer and closer together, and they were getting more and more intense.
Mm.
So it was like, ooh, I can kind of do the math. I can kind of see where this is going. And then what happened is I went up to my father's house and it was Father's Day, and I got into an argument over something really stupid. And then 6 weeks went by and I didn't talk to my mom and dad. And then I said, oh, I'm going to go up there and try to mend this fence. And so I went up there for dinner. Instead of mending the fence, we just kind of resumed the argument, and it turned pretty heated. And so I went to leave because we have fight or flight
Mm-hmm.
or freeze, but there's no freeze in a Green Beret. So it's either fight or flight. So I was on the process of leaving, and my dad said, get your ass back here. What he meant was, you owe your mother an apology because I dropped a few F bombs in their home disrespectfully. And, but what my reptilian brain heard was, oh, I don't have flight anymore. So all I got is fight. So I turned and punched punched a hole in the drywall as if to say, don't take another, like, you
Yeah.
do not want
You
to make
don't
this
want me
decision.
coming back in here.
Yeah, like think really carefully, old man.
Yeah.
Think real carefully. And so then he called out to my sister and said, call the cops. And I sat in the driveway and waited for the cops to come. They came, and I was like, my whole attitude around it was like, this is such a waste of my time. I got better things to be doing, whatever projects I have. So I sat there because it was a rural county. So it took him 45 minutes even to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I talked to him for 5 minutes. I told him the story. I told him exactly what I told you. Like, can I just go home now? Like, all I did was punch a wall, and then they went inside and interviewed all of them, and they came back out like 45 minutes later and said, I'm like, can I go? Am I free to go? And he just simply said, I need you to step out of the car and put your hands on the
Mm.
on the door. And I just felt like my whole world just like closed in on me. And so yeah, got a ride in a cruiser to to the jailhouse with
Mm-hmm.
handcuffs on the whole way. And two things happened in that jail cell. One was I finally admitted I have a problem,
Yep.
which I don't think I'd really truly admitted to up until then. And number two, I realized that I was in that insanity circle, where you keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. And because the thing was, it wasn't for lack of trying. I mean, I was on all the antidepressants. I was going to counseling. I was going to therapy. I was going to AA. Was doing everything that was told to me to do. I was a good soldier. I know how to obey orders, so I was doing all the things. but the problem was is nothing changed. In fact, things kept getting worse and worse and worse. So when I got out, I started Googling, how to cure PTSD. Is PTSD curable? Can soldiers recover from PTSD?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that led me down a rabbit hole that we like to call plant medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So I heard about this thing called ayahuasca, a tea made up of two primary ingredients from South America, and I made it my mission to try to go. And then pandemic happened, and so it took me forever to try to find it. I finally connected with it in 2021, and changed my life.
Change your life
Overnight, yeah, overnight changed my life.
overnight.
Yeah. Like, well, I mean, overnight in the sense that the ceremony, the retreat was 4 days and 3 nights. So over a weekend.
I mean, I in the grand scheme of things, we can classify
Overnight.
that as
Yeah.
overnight.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Like I walked out of that ceremony, no longer alcoholic, no longer using opioids. I haven't had any antidepressants, any opioids, in over 2 years now. I do have an occasional drink, but the thing is then I was drinking to medicate. Now I might have a beer with dinner or something.
Yeah.
And there might be two a month versus half a bottle of Jameson a night
To get you to sleep at night. Yeah.
Yeah. Now it's just a matter of like, oh, it's super hot and I've been working outside all day. Maybe I'll have a cold beer,
Sure.
It's an entirely different energy. But yeah, so occasional drink, but no opioids, no antidepressants, none of that. And the nightmares, that was the other thing too. That's why it was so hard getting to drink, or why I would have to drink to go to sleep, is because you're just so sick and tired of having these nightmares every night. And then those all evaporated too, all gone overnight. And what happened is like, there was suddenly this real deep realization that everything that I ever, like, you have to understand, I grew up LDS Mormon, right?
You guys not touching that stuff, right?
Right. And I'm not now. I've left the church, because again, like, this has been a spiritual awakening. And so, yeah, like, for the first, 20 years of my life, like, taboo. And then, of course, on top of that, you got the government preaching, how taboo it is. Yeah. And then you go into the military where, like, if you so much as touch a joint, you're going to get caught and lose, you could be in 19 years, 11 months and 3 weeks and lose 20, lose all of that and not get a pension. So, of course, like, I went from smoking maybe half a dozen joints in high school, just kind of experimentally, to nothing for almost 30 plus years, and then jumping into ayahuasca, the granddaddy, the OG.
Well, I'm grateful that you're willing to talk about it, because I don't know, man. I'm just a guy on the outside looking in, but thinking like there's got to be a better way than that method of the opioid alcohol cocktail. So you could just black out. There's got to be a better way. And what you're showing and telling is that by your firsthand experiences, there is a better way. How's Matt Butler now? How are those relationships now? How's your family now? All that stuff.
Well, this is the beauty of a spiritual awakening and healing. And I'll probably get some crap from the special forces community for saying this, but again, candid and transparent. One day I just realized, like, I was like a typical Green Beret. I don't know how many guns I had, and that was the answer, right? Like, someone would ask you how many guns you have, like, I don't know, because you stop counting at a certain point. You just keep buying and buying and buying. And that was me. I enjoy shooting. I did, and then one day I just woke up and said, you know what? I don't need these guns anymore. My dad's biggest dream in life was to own a boat, and he's never been able to get it. And I sold all my guns and bought my dad a
And
boat.
bought him a boat.
Yeah, that's how my relationship is now. So they've all
Yeah.
been repaired.
Yeah.
The plant medicine gives you the the insight the insight that you need in order to heal things. The thing about plant medicine is it takes you into your subconscious, and in your subconscious you can see things that you can't see in your conscious.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest and most transformative journeys that I ever had was seeing the pain and the burden and the emotional burden that my father carried, and crying and weeping and weeping and weeping over that poor man's pain, and realizing how much I've added to that. So whatever silly argument it was I had with him back in 17 or 18, I mean, like, it is so insignificant when you start to understand what a human being he is as well, and not, and it's not just my father, all the different relationships I've
We're all
really,
carrying stuff. We're all carrying
yeah.
that. Then when they come to interaction heads, right?
But
It's
you
sort of,
can't,
it's
you
all,
can't,
you can't see
yeah,
it.
you can't, because your ego gets
Right.
in the way
That's
of
right. No,
it.
totally.
Your
Totally.
ego gets in the way of all of that. That's where the arguments come from. That's where
Sure.
the disagreements,
Sure.
all that. And so, what I was able to finally see through plant medicine was is empathy. I mean, plain and simple, it's empathy. It's like
Yeah.
finally being able to see something other than what my ego was telling me to see, and then just crying and sobbing and realizing how much. And it's not just personal relationships, it was everything. It was like realizing how much I loved Mother Earth, and all. And yeah, I mean, it was like full wholesale spiritual awakening, going like, oh my God,
Yeah.
like, I cannot believe how wrong I have been for half a century. And what am I going to do about that now? And then that's the thing, is like, when I suddenly realized how beautiful and safe and effective these medicines are, then it kind of made me mad, right? Because now I'm like, wait a minute, I've been lied to by my church, by my family, by the government, by Nancy Reagan. Everybody's been lying to me for 50 years, man. Hold on a second. So that's when I went down that rabbit hole of trying to understand. Now, I need to clarify. I keep calling them medicine because, like frankly, they are medicine. I have, the federal government has 3 criteria for a Scheduled 1 narcotic. It is must be addictive, must be could be possibly fatal at at a high dosage, and last but not least, must not hold any medicinal value. Okay, so frankly, like crack, heroin, fentanyl, things like that, Schedule 1 narcotic, right?
Sure. Yeah. Got it. Check. Addictive,
Right.
could kill you. No medicinal value. We got it.
Yeah. Which you could argue fentanyl does have some medicinal value, because technically it was, derived
sure,
as a painkiller,
but in what it's morphed into and what it is today.
Yeah, bath salts, all these,
it's a cold-blooded killer that, by the way, was
meth is a perfect example, right?
Pouring across the borders too, which is a whole nother conversation. But the difference is, by tapping into what you're talking about, plant-based medicines, and you use that word with intentionality, is being able to leverage those things for the betterment, for the good, for taking care of yourself.
The funny thing is they're all Schedule 1 narcotics, which mean and they don't meet any single one of the criteria.
Right.
They're not addictive. They're not fatal at any dose. Like, it's impossible. Like, there's in no place in recorded history is there any evidence of anybody ever ODing on cannabis or psilocybin or ayahuasca.
Right.
There's no evidence, period.
Right.
End of story.
Right.
And then of course they hold medicinal value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude,
it's
we don't probably have the time, or even, I don't even really have enough know-how to really get into, but the point of why I wanted to talk to you about it, well, I'm glad you're willing to do it. And by the way, everything you've talked about today, I promise you, this is the first time you've ever been on the show. You don't know me that well, but our folks, we just don't take for granted you going through all of this and just taking an hour to talk to me about it. We don't take any of that for granted. So thanks for doing it. But what I think it's showing is like, there are other pathways forward. And what I hope is happening is, and we're seeing it from the Rogans to all these other, you're seeing a groundswell of, wait, well, let's learn more. Let's know more. Let's explore more. Let's not just shut it down as these things are class one, like that's it. Boom. No, like there's more to it. There's more nuance to it. There's way more.
We've been totally lied to.
And to your point, right? Just to be blunt. Yeah. Wool's been pulled over your eyes.
Yeah. We've been straight up lied to by the, I forget the name of the family, but the family that was behind, they were in that movie Dope Sick. That was the story about, the opioid crisis.
Dude, watch it. Watch the Netflix series. It's a 4-parter where they go through all these, right? And I'm not doing all those things, but I just was able to watch and at least be open-minded about what's out there and what could help people break through. And to your point, there's no hyperbole when you say your life was changed and saved.
100% changed my life. 100% saved my life. I was so suicidal. I just didn't have any reason for living whatsoever, and had no joy, had no happiness, had no peace. But there's chemicals floating around in your brain that you can do something about. That's what I'm learning. Right. And the funny thing is like all the drugs and the medicines that the VA wants to give you actually just make the matter worse. I know that's the bullshit of it, man. Yeah. And these are like literally plants. Like, it's insane to me to think. Right. Like native people have been using it for years to remedy themselves. There must be something there that's legit. Yeah. Like we're talking like thousands and thousands and thousands of years of recorded history using these plants to heal. And then all of a sudden, the government comes along and tells us that they're dangerous. The beauty of platforms, it's sort of the beauty of this podcast space. And listen, go do your homework, right? Well, go do your homework. You can research it, but there's more cases and more people speaking up about it. And so I think that you're just going to continue to see a groundswell for this kind of stuff. Well, I like to approach it from a real rational place and say, like, if you had an upset stomach and you took an antacid, calcium, to quell that, would that make sense? And most people say yes. If you were constipated and you ate oatmeal, would that make sense? Right. Sure. Well, then no. Then what are the reasons that we have cannabis, psilocybin, and ayahuasca? What do they do? And can we use it if you could take an antacid, but what if I told you you could make a super simple tea of ginger and mint and honey, and you'd feel just as good with natural ingredients? Exactly. Sounds pretty good to me. Yeah. So that's that was kind of the awakening that I had around the plant medicines and realizing just how safe, it was the effectiveness of it all. Yeah. Because like a lot of times when I kind of do a couple things now. One is I advocate, like I'm been on multiple nonprofits working for the decriminalization of these plants. Right. And then second of all, helping veterans to find the medicine, because that's a really hard thing. You don't know who to trust. You don't know where to go and things like that. And so that's been a big part of it. And it's always kind of an interesting process to kind of help people navigate that space. But hey, will you do me a favor? Yeah. The more you go through it, let's check back in. Okay. Right? Let's carry this conversation on, right? Keep working, keep advocating. Matt, I got to tell you, man, it's it's a real conversation. I'm grateful for it, man. This, sharing your entire story, what you're doing now. So we need to catch back up on that. Like I want to come back and go in depth. And this whole thing, right? This whole conversation today, we're lifting up nows, right? That's the sort of the point that brought us together. And let's 100%. Not forget that, right? For sure. Brother, I'm grateful for you, man. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate you having me. Anytime. It's Matt Butler. This has been just an amazing conversation. We could probably Rogan this thing and go for 3 or 4 hours, but I'm going to let you go for now. And we'll come back and we'll do more later. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Sounds great. Hang tight for a second. Yep. He's Matt Butler. I'm Brian Jodis. That's been this episode of Pick Up the Six podcast.